You ever feel like you need to understand a really complex situation like yesterday? That's where we come in. Today, we're plunging into a fascinating legal battle unfolding right now in Caldwell County, Missouri.
Exactly. And we've got quite a stack of court documents here.
Yeah.
It all centers on a lawsuit between Meghann Miller and Sarah Jo Crawford. And let me tell you, the allegations are pretty serious.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're talking about claims of defamation, harassment, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. That sounds incredibly intense. For you, the listener, our aim is really to get a grip on how this whole dispute has unfolded and what the core legal arguments actually are.
Precisely. We're looking at, the whole range. A motion to speed up a hearing, a sworn statement adding new evidence, a cease and desist letter from before the suit, the hearing notice itself, and then these really key documents, the defendant's motion to dismiss the case entirely, and the plaintiff's opposition laying out why it absolutely shouldn't be dismissed.
Right. So where does this all kick off legally? What's the starting point in the court records?
Okay, so the initial lawsuit, the petition, was officially filed on March 13th this year, 2025. In that document, Meghann Miller, she's the plaintiff, the one bringing the suit, she lays out her case against Sarah Jo Crawford, the defendant. She claims Crawford published things about her that were untrue and harmful. And what really stands out is the allegation that these statements were even directed at her children.
Wow, okay. Targeting the kids, that's definitely a serious escalation. What kind of harm is Miller saying she's actually suffered from all this?
Well, she argues it's caused reputational harm. Damage to her name and standing, plus financial losses, economic harm, and significant emotional distress. She's put a number on it, too, claiming quantifiable damages over $100,000. And she specifically mentions harm to her professional life and what she calls interference with her parental rights or custody. And interestingly, she also mentions filing a complaint with the FBI way back in February 2025, detailing what she described as ongoing cyber harassment. So clearly this wasn't just a one-off thing. It seems to have been brewing.
Yeah, it sounds like there was a history here. Were there any, attempts to sort this out before it ended up in court? Any warnings?
Yes, definitely. We have a formal cease and desist letter. It's dated September 16th, 2024. So well before the March lawsuit. Miller sent this directly to Crawford. It's a very clear demand to stop what Miller calls harassing, slanderous, that's spoken falsehoods, and defamatory written or published falsehoods behavior aimed at her and also her mother, Becky Curtis.
Okay. Does the letter get specific? What actions did it actually demand Crawford stop doing?
It specifically calls out harmful TikTok videos. Miller claims they had false and malicious content. And kind of interestingly, the letter cites Kansas law on defamation, even though the lawsuit itself is filed in Missouri. The demands were pretty clear. Take down the videos immediately, stop making any more false statements, and absolutely no future contact with Miller or her mother. And crucially, it included a warning. If these demands weren't met within 10 days, legal action would follow.
And, well, obviously that 10-day deadline came and went without things being resolved, given we now have a lawsuit. So, shifting to the actual court filings, Miller tried to get things moving quickly, right? With a restraining order.
Exactly. The plaintiff, Miller, filed what's called an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order, a TRO, and along with it, a motion to expedite, to speed up the hearing on that TRO. Now, getting a TRO in Missouri, there's a specific legal test you have to meet. The motion itself actually points to a case, State ex rel, Director of Revenue v. Gabbard, which lays out these requirements.
Okay, right. So what are those requirements? What does Miller need to show the judge to even get this TRO considered, especially quickly?
There are basically four main things. First, she has to show a likelihood she'll eventually win the main lawsuit. That's the likelihood of success on the merits. Second, she needs to demonstrate she'll suffer irreparable harm that money can't just fix later if the court doesn't step in right away. Third, the court weighs the potential harm to her if the TRO isn't granted against the potential harm to Crawford if it is. This is the balance of equities or balance of harms. And fourth, she has to argue that granting the order serves the public interest.
Got it. 4 hurdles. And what about speeding up the hearing itself? Is there a rule for that?
Yeah, there is. Missouri Rule 92.02D generally says a hearing on a TRO request should happen within 15 days. But there's an out. If the person asking for the TRO can show good cause, they can ask for it faster. Miller argued the ongoing nature of Crawford's alleged conduct was that good cause, and she asked for the hearing to be held within just 7 days.
So what was the basis for that urgency? What new stuff did she bring to the table to justify moving so fast?
Well, she filed what's called a supplemental affidavit. It's basically a sworn statement with extra evidence, and she filed it on May 7th. This document details alleged misconduct by Crawford that continued after Crawford was officially served with the lawsuit papers on April 28th.
Ah, okay. So the argument is, even knowing she was being sued, the defendant allegedly kept going, maybe even ramped it up.
That seems to be the claim, yes.
Yeah.
That the behavior didn't stop and maybe even escalated after the legal process formally started.
So this is where it gets really specific, right? What exactly is Miller claiming happened after the lawsuit was served, according to this affidavit?
Several really specific examples are listed. Things like repeated false claims that Miller had lost custody of her children because she was an incompetent parent. Miller pushes back hard on this in the affidavit, pointing to findings from the Department of Children and Families, DCF, back in January 2025, which she says completely contradict Crawford's claims. There are also allegations that Crawford kept bringing up Miller's kids and the details of ongoing family court stuff in her online posts. Plus claims that Miller was doing something illegal through her website specifically, offering legal services she wasn't authorized to provide.
Okay, and how does Miller connect this alleged ongoing conduct to that irreparable harm standard needed for the TRO? How does she argue this justifies immediate court action?
In the affidavit, she states under oath that she's still suffering severe damage to her reputation and significant emotional distress. She even says she needs ongoing therapy because of Crawford's actions. She argues this behavior legally constitutes intentional infliction of emotional distress under Missouri law, and she cites another case, Gibson v. Brewer, which helps define what kind of extreme conduct qualifies.
Right.
And on top of that, she claims Crawford's statements have directly stirred up harassment against her from other people online. She argues this is undermining her co-parenting, threatening her safety, and messing with her ability to participate properly in her family court case.
So putting it all together in that emergency motion, what was Miller asking the court to do, like right then and there?
The main specific request was to expedite the hearing on her TRO request, get it heard faster than the usual 15 days, but she also included that kind of standard legal phrase, asking for any other relief the court thinks is fair, just and proper under the circumstances.
Okay, let's dig a bit deeper into that supplemental affidavit itself. It sounds like it adds quite a bit of detail. What are the really crucial bits in there?
Yeah, it really does. The main focus is this alleged escalation of harassment, defamation, and online abuse that Miller says happened after Crawford got the lawsuit papers. Miller gives very specific examples of what she calls false accusations in TikTok videos, some posted as recently as May 6th, just the day before she filed the affidavit.
Wow. What kind of accusations are we talking about specifically in those recent videos?
According to the affidavit, Crawford accused her of offering illegal legal services through her Stand With Meg website, misrepresenting her income, being mentally unfit and having lost custody, like we mentioned, and even accusing her of fraudulently using donated funds for things like Botox or cosmetic procedures. To support this, Miller attached what she claims are transcripts of TikToks from March 19th, April 25th, and that recent May 6th one as Exhibit 5.
Okay. And does Miller try to directly refute these specific claims within the affidavit itself?
She does. She points out that on May 7th, the same day she filed the affidavit, she actually updated the description for her one-on-one sessions on her website. She says she specifically clarified that she teaches self-advocacy skills and how to learn about the law, but explicitly stated she does not give legal advice. She presents this as a direct correction to Crawford's claims.
Interesting timing on that update. The affidavit also mentions some pretty direct statements allegedly made by Crawford herself, right, about her intentions.
Yes, it does. Miller highlights a public statement Crawford apparently made online around March 28th. In it, Crawford allegedly said she intended to be a menace and to make Miller regret ever posting about Crawford's own nieces and nephews.
Whoa.
Miller presents this as direct evidence of Crawford's alleged malice, her intent to cause harm.
And it wasn't just Crawford's direct statements that Miller was concerned about. It was also the reaction they supposedly caused from others. The affidavit gets into that, too.
Absolutely. That's a huge part of it. Miller details what she calls a significant spike in public harassment aimed at her between May 6th and 7th, right after those recent TikToks. She claims this harassment was a direct result of Crawford's posts and says she documented over 100 harassing comments on TikTok just in that 2-day window. She includes examples as Exhibit 6.
100 comments in 2 days. Can you give us a flavor of what these comments were actually saying according to the examples?
Well, some apparently repeated false child abuse allegations, specifically mentioning giving her daughter Delta 8, which Miller says is untrue and was already cleared by DCF. Others called her a grifter or accused her of giving illegal legal advice, echoing Crawford's alleged claims. And, disturbingly, some repeated the claim that she'd lost custody due to incompetence.
And Miller connects these comments directly back to Crawford.
Yes, she emphasizes that the comments often specifically referenced Crawford's videos. Her argument is that Crawford's content directly triggered and incited this wave of public harassment, showing a real, tangible, harmful public reaction.
It really paints a picture of, well, a deeply toxic online situation. What does Miller say about the personal toll this is taking?
In the affidavit, Miller states this whole ongoing situation has caused her severe emotional distress, needing continued therapy. She also claims significant damage to her professional reputation, leading to social isolation and, crucially, lost job opportunities. And adding another layer, she alleges that Crawford is actually profiting from this harm, pointing to the growth in Crawford's TikTok following, which she states was over 31,000 by May 7th.
Right, the profiting angle. And this is also where the invasion of privacy claim fits in more strongly.
Exactly. Miller argues that Crawford publicly revealing private family matters, especially involving her children and the specifics of family court proceedings, violates her privacy rights under both Missouri and Kansas law. She mentions a Kansas statute, KSA 21-61011. She argues these harms are ongoing. They can't just be undone later, hitting that irreparable harm standard again. And this leads right into the specific court orders she's asking for in the affidavit.
So what specific actions, what relief was Miller asking the court to grant in this supplemental filing to try and stop these alleged harms?
The requests were pretty broad, actually. She asked the court for an order to stop Crawford from publishing any content about her or her children, posting defamatory stuff, encouraging others to harass them, and from contacting them directly at all. She also renewed her request to speed up the TRO hearing, asked the judge to seal the exhibits containing sensitive info about her kids to protect their privacy, and repeated her request to waive the bond requirement, the money you usually have to put up for a TRO, citing her financial situation, her indigency. And notably, she specifically asked the court to forbid Crawford from contacting her children in any way.
Okay, so Miller is pushing hard for immediate and pretty comprehensive court intervention, but Crawford, the defendant, she didn't just sit back, right? She responded with her own legal filings.
That's right, she did. On May 16th, Crawford's legal team filed a motion to dismiss the entire lawsuit, basically asking the court to throw the whole case out. And she also filed a separate motion specifically opposing Miller's request for the temporary restraining order.
Okay, the motion to dismiss, what are Crawford's main arguments for why the whole case should just be tossed out right now?
Her lawyers argue a few key things. First, they say many of the statements Crawford made were just expressions of opinion, not statements of fact, and opinions generally can't be defamatory under the law. Second, they argue her statements were about a matter of public controversy, and that Miller, possibly as a limited public figure in this context, hasn't plausibly alleged actual malice. That's a really high bar, meaning Crawford knew the statements were false or acted with reckless disregard for the truth.
Right, the actual malice standard.
Exactly.
Right.
They also bring up the classic defamation defense. Truth. They argue that if her statements were true, or even substantially true, then that's a complete defense.
Okay, it makes sense. What about the other claims Miller made, harassment, privacy, emotional distress? What are Crawford's arguments there?
For the harassment claim, the motion suggests Miller doesn't have the legal standing to bring that kind of claim in a civil suit. They might be arguing it's defined under criminal statutes, and maybe doesn't create a separate civil cause of action for damages in this way. On invasion of privacy, they argue the information shared either wasn't truly private or that Miller herself had already put it out there publicly, essentially waiving her privacy rights on those specific facts. And for intentional infliction of emotional distress, Crawford's team argues her conduct, even if unpleasant, just doesn't rise to the incredibly high legal standard of extreme and outrageous needed for that claim. Finally, they argue Miller hasn't shown a clear causal link between Crawford's statements and any provable damages, like specific financial losses or quantifiable reputational harm.
Okay, so Crawford's strategy seems to be hitting each claim on legal grounds, saying Miller just hasn't met the requirements. How did Miller's team fire back against this motion to dismiss and the opposition to the TRO?
Miller's side responded quickly, filing a detailed opposition on May 19th. Their basic legal argument against dismissal is the standard one. At this early stage, the court just has to decide if the petition states any plausible claim for relief, assuming all of Miller's factual allegations are true. They argue her complaint clearly does state valid claims.
Right. So how do they specifically counter Crawford's arguments on each count? Let's start with defamation again.
On defamation, they really emphasize the volume, those 89 alleged TikTok videos since last June, and the very public, ongoing nature of the conflict. They list the specific false claims again: child abuse refuted by DCF, fraud, illegal services despite the website clarification, calling her a grifter, speculating about mental health, the Botox claims, manipulating videos. They highlight the huge view counts on some videos: 2.9 million in January, 1.1 million in April, and Crawford's follower growth after getting sued, jumping from 31K to 35K. They also point to Crawford's admitted earnings over $2 a month, contrasting it with Miller's claimed financial ruin and job loss, which they link directly to Crawford's content-dominating search results for Stand With Meg. They argue these statements are so damaging on their face they constitute libel per se, meaning harm is presumed.
And their response to the harassment arguments, how do they counter the standing issue?
Miller's team argues that Crawford actively incited thousands of harassing comments. They documented 73 examples in Exhibit 6, and that this is a form of actionable harassment. They bring up Crawford's alleged March 28th menace comment again, and an earlier alleged admission on March 17th, where Crawford supposedly asked followers to report Miller's content. They're essentially saying Crawford orchestrated a harassment campaign using her platform, and that causing that kind of harm is something the civil court can address, regardless of specific criminal harassment statutes.
Okay. And how do they tackle the defenses against invasion of privacy and intentional infliction of emotional distress?
For privacy, they double down. Sharing private family and custody details with a massive audience is an invasion, period. Miller having some online presence doesn't give Crawford carte blanche to reveal sensitive private facts. On emotional distress, they argue the totality of Crawford's conduct, the sheer number of videos, the escalation post-lawsuit, inciting comments, Miller losing her job while Crawford allegedly profits, Crawford's own stated intent to be a menace, the false CPS stuff, all of that combined absolutely meets the extreme and outrageous standard likely to cause severe distress.
And they push back directly on Crawford's main defamation defenses too, right? Like the opinion versus fact thing.
Yes, strongly. They argue Crawford's statements aren't just opinions. They're presented as facts and are provably false. They also firmly assert Miller is a private figure, not public. This is key, because for a private figure, the standard is usually negligence, basically. Carelessness in publishing falsehoods, not the much harder to prove actual malice. They argue Crawford's posts were, at minimum, reckless and negligent, and they reiterate they've shown falsity and damages the job loss, the reputation damage, the emotional distress, the financial ruin, directly contrasting it with Crawford's alleged financial gain from the very content causing the harm.
So Miller's team is really fighting on all fronts legally. What's their core argument in this opposition document for why the judge absolutely should grant the temporary restraining order?
They argue Miller clearly meets all four parts of that TRO test we talked about earlier. 1, likelihood of success. They say their claims are strong, backed by the evidence presented. 2, irreparable harm. They argue it's ongoing. The posts continue, the reach grows, comments are incited, jobs are lost, finances ruined, emotional distress founts, family court is impacted, and only an immediate order can stop it. 3, balance of harms. They say it heavily favors Miller, who's suffering immense harm, while Crawford faces minimal burden by simply stopping allegedly illegal conduct, especially conduct she's allegedly profiting from. 4, public interest. They argue stopping defamation and harassment, particularly involving children, serves the public good.
What about free speech? Does Miller's team address potential First Amendment arguments from Crawford?
Yes, they tackle that head-on. They argue that false defamatory speech simply isn't protected by the First Amendment, and they stress the TRO they're asking for is narrow. It targets only the specific alleged defamatory content and the incitement of harassment, not all of Crawford's speech in general. They also renew the plea to waive the bond due to Miller's finances and argue again that the exhibit should be sealed to protect the children's privacy, stating these examples represent a much larger pattern.
Okay, so finally, what specific court orders are Miller's lawyers asking for in this opposition filing? What do they want the judge to do?
It's a pretty detailed list. They ask the court to flat out deny Crawford's motion, to dismiss and deny her motion against the TRO. Then they ask for the TRO itself, specifying it should stop Crawford from posting any content about Miller, her kids, or her mother, inciting harassment, contacting Miller or the kids, and require Crawford to immediately remove the 89-plus TikToks about them, specifically naming ones from Jan 16, March 17, and May 14. They also want to prohibit re-uploading similar stuff, using Miller's name likeness, or talking about the kids or custody. Plus, again, waive the bond, seal the exhibits, and let them submit more evidence later if needed. It's comprehensive.
Wow. Yeah, comprehensive is right. A huge amount is being asked for, and a lot is clearly hanging in the balance. And you mentioned a hearing was actually scheduled to sort through some of this?
That's correct. A hearing was set for May 20th, 2025 at 2:00 p.m. It was scheduled to be heard by Judge Ryan Wesley Horseman there in the Caldwell County Courthouse.
Okay, so let's try and wrap our heads around this. We've got a situation that started as online conflict, right? It escalated even after a formal legal warning, and now it's hit this really critical point in court. Meghann Miller is alleging serious ongoing harm from Sarah Jo Crawford's online actions, and she's backed it up with detailed court filings pointing to specific online content and its alleged real-world impact.
Right. And on the other side, Sarah Jo Crawford is arguing, through her lawyers, that Miller's claims just don't hold water legally, that they don't meet the required standards for defamation, harassment, privacy invasion, or emotional distress, and that her speech is either opinion, true, or constitutionally protected.
It really gives you a window into how the legal system is trying to grapple with, well, the messiness of online life today.
Exactly. You see these established legal standards, the tests for a TRO, the elements of defamation, what counts as harassment being applied to TikTok videos and online comments. It really forces a consideration of how digital communication fits into these older legal boxes.
Yeah, and you can see the potential aha moments for anyone following this, understanding what irreparable harm really means in practice, or the difference between opinion and actionable defamation, or just how seriously the courts might take online conduct.
Absolutely. And it highlights the very real consequences that online actions can trigger. We're talking significant legal battles, potential financial ruin, major emotional distress. It's not just words online anymore, is it?
No, definitely not. It really pushes you to think about that line, doesn't it, between free expression online and actually causing tangible, legally recognized harm to someone else. What is the responsibility of someone with a large online platform? And how should the courts navigate these disputes that can blow up so fast in the digital world? This case, whatever the outcome, really forces us to consider the boundaries of online speech and the weight our digital footprints carry. It's certainly something to keep thinking about long after this deep dive ends.